If you're new to this channel, this is where we talk about property investing, share smart investing strategies, and anything property related. So if you haven't already, make sure you hit subscribe, smash that like button. All right, now let's get into today's question. Now, getting into questions. So we've got a question here from Nick. What yield should I expect? Some people say not to go below 5%. Is this a good strategy? So thanks for flicking that one through, Nick. I guess, firstly, for those unfamiliar with what rental yield is, so rental yield is the percentage of rental income versus the value of the property. So as the most simplistic example, if we've got a $100,000 property, that's what it's worth. We've got a 4% rental yield. It's bringing in $4,000 per annum of rental income. If we've got a 5% rental yield, we've got a $5,000 a year rental income. Now, I guess instinctively, we want to go out there and go, well, great, I want the highest rental yield. Why wouldn't I want that? Because the more rental income I have, the more money I have to cover my bills and outgoings or money in my pocket. But the thing with rental yields, there isn't necessarily a standard metric, because you can go into places like far north Queensland where you might be looking at properties high fives, maybe even in the high sixes in terms of rental returns. But the reality is that their council rates, water rates, insurances, they might be 20, 30, 50, sometimes more than 100% more in some other locations. The other things to keep in mind is that rental yield difference could be, $10, $20, $30 a week for every 0.1% of difference at about a $500,000 property. Depending on the exact price point, it's going to be somewhere between $9 to $11 per week. Now, me personally, when I'm looking at properties, I don't want to restrict too many locations off my searching point. I also don't want to restrict too many properties that come my way, because I might look at a property at 5% and I can be jumping up and down saying this is a great purchase because I've got a 5% yield. But then I could have another one come across my desk and it's at 4.5%. But I'm looking at it, potentially the land shape's better or the size is better, potentially the kitchen, the bathroom, just the general house is in better condition. Maybe it's got an extra bedroom, whatever it might be. Those things might be more appealing to me as an investor, and I would potentially be willing to trade off that difference in yield to buy the asset that I'm most comfortable with, but also two, potentially the better condition it's in might be a trade-off in terms of I've got less repairs and maintenance bills over the longer term of that property as well. So there's not really necessarily a magical rental return that we should be chasing. It's more about the opportunities that are presented to us. But on top of that too, it's understanding in general, your rental yields are going to compress as you go higher up in price. So if we take a look at this slide here, on a $500,000 property, we're at about a 4.9% yield. We're getting $500 a week. We fast forward to around a 750 property. The rent might only be around that 560, 570 number. And all of a sudden we're just under 4%. But then we go all the way down to $1 million and we might be at 640 a week and we might be down at 3.33. Now, things to keep in mind as well here is what you are comfortable with should be some of the most important things, because I could be dealing with a client up here at 500,000 and they're comfortable with regional Victoria or regional Australia, and we can make that work. But we might have another client come in and they say, hey, I'm wanting to invest in property, but I'm only going to buy in large metro locations as close to the CBD as I possibly can, which that's going to eliminate that $500,000 property. So there's going to be some trade-offs, one not only being price, but the other one being rental return. But there's also some trade-offs going up higher in the yield, because on this $1 million property, what I can confidently say is that versus the $500,000 property, the rates aren't twice as expensive, the insurances aren't twice as expensive, the other ongoing costs, if the dishwasher breaks or the aircon breaks in the $500,000 property versus the $1 million property, it's going to be a similar replacement cost. So some of those costs get offset, and when you bring in the complete running costs on a property, they do offset one another. So it's really coming down to what you feel most comfortable with. But if we take a look at our median purchase, so the median purchase price of $575 and a yield of 4.9%, that doesn't mean that we're buying X amount of properties at these numbers. The median price and the median yield in this example are independent of one another, because our typical buyer brief is going to be somewhere between, say, 400 to 600,000. That's just based off affordability. Rental yield 4 to 5%. When you break down the numbers off our last 100 purchases as a business, 24 of them have been between 500 to 600,000. All of those 24, their yields have been between 4.1 to 5.5, and only 3 of them have been at 5% or more. So essentially, if you go out there and say, well, I only want the 5% yield at this price point, we're eliminating, over 90% of our opportunities. And realistically, it's that opportunity cost we need to be keeping mindful of when we're buying a property, because if you're out of the market for the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months, and that market moves 5, 10, 20%, that extra $50 in your pocket that you've been chasing has been far outstripped by the opportunity cost of performance that you've missed out on. So there's more than one factor. I appreciate your question, Nick, but for me, it'd be more about the location and the asset themselves, whether I'm getting an extra $10, $20, $30, $40 a week on rent. That's a really, really big one for me. But thanks for flicking that one through.